All right. So, yeah, how you doing, everybody? Wanted to do this week is letter Q, which I kind of put off a little bit because I happen to be coming up to do some stuff with my Northwest Metalworks label co-owner and friend Brian Nairn. Wanted to get him on a couple of these videos too, especially since he has a very large um, probably one of the larger Queensryche collections. I believe you're one of the handful of guys that has a pretty one of the biggest collections in the world kind of thing, correct?
Yeah, I pretty much geeked out on Queensryche pretty early, and so I still have a lot of stuff. Uh, but first, I want to thank everyone who watches this, who supports us, and we do really appreciate the community we're building, and we really enjoy being part of it. So thanks for tuning in and supporting us with your attention, your dollars, and your likes. So cool.
So to start it off, of course, we did a book, which is on the band Queensryche. It's their history, building an empire, the story of Queensryche. Brian and I wrote the book with another friend of ours, Brian Heaton, who's a Sacramento guy, or outside of that, but basically a Sacramento guy. He ran a website for years, a message board back in those days on the band Queensryche. Interviewed the guys at various times, a lot of the guys from the band, and toured around with them. He actually went around on some of the tours and stuff with the guys, and was involved in. Now he still does a fan devoted website, articles and different things he puts up there, and um, he, yeah, he was really instrumental in helping us get the book done and working with us on it, and contributing writing and interviews and things. So we did that kind of as a trio working together, and um, came out really well. I think everybody seems to like it a lot. We still have copies if you're interested, of course, northwestmetalworks.com. We also did a hardcover besides this paperback, which has color pages, and we all signed and numbered it. So there's only 300 of those. We have a few of those left. They're getting pretty low. So
Yeah, and with the hardback came, uh, we still have a few of the deluxe posters we designed for that release, and a few of the interview discs. We have some interviews from 83, 84, and 97 with the band. So
it's really cool.
very limited, but they're really cool if you buy the hardback.
Yeah, those are neat radio interviews that the different people, Steve Slayton and Beth Rivers was the
Beth
other
Rivers.
gal, and Scott Vanderpool all were kind enough to let us use those on these little bonus discs. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
All in their entirety. So you get to hear the original interviews with the band in those days. So it was kind of a fun little tie-in.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It makes for a nice little collectible. And
yeah,
Queensryche's one of those bands that's always been really collectible.
yeah.
I think they were aware of that, and I think that's how a lot of their packaging was geared to make sure, people were attracted to it both musically, but as a visual form, and so they've done some pretty neat products over the years.
Yeah, definitely. So for those that aren't familiar with Queensryche or just kind of knew them from a couple of their hits and stuff, they're a band that goes back to their roots kind of go back to the late 70s. There was a couple of the two guitarists for Queensryche were in a band called Joker. Was involved in the Battle of the Bands in '79 at Lake Hills. Jeff Tate then fronted a band called Tyrant, who competed and made it all the way to the finals. Um, Adam Brenner was in TKO, and also Adam Baum later on. He was the guitarist of the band. Gary Thompson was drum. But also Michael Wilton and Chris DeGarmo were in a band called Joker, as I said, with Paul Passarelli, the Lipstick Singer. So they all competed in the battles. As time went on, the couple guitarists ended up forming a band called The Mob. And they initially had a different singer who didn't last very long because he lived pretty far away. And then Jeff, they talked into coming on and doing some cover songs with him. So they did a few performances in '81, handful of couple little festival type of things. One that Brett Miller put on was the first Northwest Metal Fest. Jeff actually sang for two bands, Babylon, which was kind of his prog rock, hard rock band at the time. But he also, at the start of the show, the opener was the was the Mob, with Jeff singing with them as well. So it was the first time these guys all ended up being on the same stage together. Jeff was more interested in doing originals, so he ended up joining Myth. And that's the band he went to for a while, and a couple years of playing shows and writing original music with them. They got kind of popular in the scene, and the Mob guys woodshedded, wrote original material, eventually saved up their money and went into Triad Studios in Redmond, and again talked Jeff into coming with them, and this time recording some music in the studios, of which he actually contributed lyrics to the last song, Lady Wore Black. All the rest of the music and lyrics were written by Chris and Michael. And so he didn't join the band, but out of the strength of these demos, they did have interest from Kim and Diana Harris, who owned Easy Street Records and who had a lot of connections in the industry. Diana had actually worked in management in Seattle, managing Stryker and Epicenter and some other bands in the 70s with her previous husband. So she had connections. They were able to get interest. They traveled overseas and got a tape to Kerrang magazine of the demos, and had interest in, shop the guys around and tried to get some attention. And that led to EMI signing the band to a lengthy record deal, which they started recording music. And as they say, the rest is history. So obviously they've had a number of albums. Jeff, eventually they parted ways with him in 2012. And they have a newer singer, Todd Latore, who briefly fronted Crimson Glory when they reunited after the original singer died. He sang for them some festivals, did some demo or two with them. So he has quite a bit of range, can sing. Some similarities to Jeff. A lot of people said he kind of sounds similar, but he certainly has his own thing. There's a little more aggression to his vocals, that Jeff had a little cleaner type of vocals, but he fits in. He can sing the material. They've done 4 great records with Todd, so the band continues on. And then just a couple original members left in the band at this point after Scott, the drummer, left. Now it's just Mike Wilton and Ed Jackson, the bass player. Chris DeGarmo left in the late 90s, of course, going back to that point, stepped down. So Queensryche, so worldwide known band. As Brian said, they've released a lot of things over the years. There's a lot of different interesting collectibles. So rather than doing a breakdown of each album, as obviously we've done a book which does that, and there's a lot of information out there about them, we thought we might show some interesting collectibles, especially since Brian has quite a lot of that. So I'm going to turn it over to him and let him kind of to show off some interesting stuff that he grabbed that are kind of rare items that, maybe a lot of you guys have never seen before. So
my introduction to Queensryche was being in Easy Street one day, and Kim Harris saying, "Hey, I'm going to put some music on the stereo in the store here. It's a local band I'm going to produce and manage." And he put the 206 tape on, and blew my mind. And of course, I didn't believe him. It was a local band because they were so well rehearsed, so refined. The songwriting was like out of the box. I mean, they were just like top notch right from the get go. And so that was my introduction. That was sometime in 1982, and so I just began anything that they were released, I would pick it up, and I had amassed quite a collection, and I've thinned the herd quite a bit over the years, but I thought I'd just bring in a few things and show them to you. One of the rarest things as far as Queensryche collectibles was the Lady Wore Black test pressing. Originally, there was only about 6 of these floating around, and over time, we've determined that there's about 10 of these that people say, yeah, I own one. Really rare test pressings. They usually did 3 to 5 copies. They were handed out to label execs or the people producing the records to say, hey, how does it sound on vinyl? If they say, wow, it sounds great, then they go to press. If there's any changes that might need to be made, they would have done that after the fact. So this was one of the things that EMI had put out as soon as they were convinced that these guys were going to be this big band, and so the band had self financed the 206 EP. So a lot of people know about that. During our research, we found out that they'd produced about 14,500 of these records, and on the strength of those sales, and of course the band live, EMI America signed this band, and within the next 2 weeks of signing, the EMI produced 35,000 copies of the EP, and those sold out immediately. And so they immediately jumped on tours and went from playing in front of 1,200 people to 10,000 people in Texas. So
there's an original that I showed. This is the 206 pressings. They had, after the Kerrang review was so favorable when the Harrises went over to England, they came back home. Kim told us, we did a lengthy interview with him a couple years before he passed away, and he said they came home and they literally had like a couple thousand orders for a tape that they didn't have.
Yeah.
So they put the money in to press up the record, and as Brian said, they ended up pressing up quite a bit of copies. Green Roll distributed the record. They had a couple different distributors that did really well, and as he said, on the strength of that, and they were so honed as a band for practice. They had played, as a lot of the myth was that Queensryche was a band that just got signed and went out there and toured, but they actually, as we said, they had the mob, which was the musicians who were, playing various shows and practicing. Jeff had stage experience quite a bit, and so, collectively they were rehearsed enough that by the time they did get signed, they were really ready to go out there and do it. And so they were always tight from the very start. From anybody that saw them, they were, got up on stage and really brought it and were very, polished as an act. So I think that was a lot of why they were able to get up and out and immediately be, a band on a much bigger scale. So yeah.
So once they were signed, Diana Vaughn Harris actually came up with this idea. This is the 206 film can. You've probably heard about them. So it's basically a test pressing for that EP, and they decided to put them in a film can, have this really cool reflective label in it. The U.S. version just has a plain white label numbered 1 and 2, but it looks like this. And they produced about 200 of these for the U.S. market, because there was about 204 hard rock stations, or stations that played hard rock in America. Now they did like 25 of these in Canada, and in Canada it came with a little letter on yellow paper from a programmer, and had quotes about how exciting this band was and things as such. So, and to stay with the EP for one more item here. This is the Greek version of the EP. Came out in 1988, and what they did in Greece was released it with a little bit of different artwork, black cover with the band, but instead of being a 4-song, they added The Prophecy to this. So The Prophecy was a single they had worked up and eventually saw the light of day later on, but the Greeks decided they wanted to put something extra. So that's the only EP that comes with that kind of thing.
And it did later get, when they finally issued that on CD in the late 80s, they added that track to it. And of course, later on, when they did the remastered, they kept that on there and they put the live show as well. But that's the only vinyl form, as Brian was saying. Another neat thing is they did a couple of these promos that are like a newspaper. This is the second one. There's a first one too. they both say 83, but Brian said this is actually the second one that has the warning um, promo photo, and they're really neat. They only did the two, and you said Kim Harris or Diana came up with that concept, and it has a bunch of different articles on the band, reviews and things, and different photos, and apparently EMI copied it to use it for Great White and other bands on the label after that as the idea of a marketing thing, and they were free in the stores.
They were free in the stores as you walked out the door to get your local music magazine. They had these in the store. They fold out like 4 times, have a ton of content in them, and they did a really good job of pushing the band and forward and getting them out there. They were really popular in Japan. Japan put this special 7-inch single out for Queen of the Reich and Lady Wore Black promo single. This one happens to be fully autographed by the entire band. They put out a laser disc for the Tokyo live show. A lot of us bought it on VHS back in the day. Well, this is the big laser disc. So it kind of emulates the singles cover, and then on the back has a nice shot of them in a sunset. So the warning, they'd been out on the road at this point and saw a lot of the world, and they were fortunate that they toured with some artists that really looked out for them and gave them like the better opportunities for good sound checks and plenty of room for the stage so they could really develop as a live act, since they really hadn't had a lot of live experience. So their learning curve was really steep for them. But guys like Ronnie James Dio, Twisted Sister, those bands gave Queensryche, Kiss too, just gave them great opportunities to really develop as a band. And so they were moving right along, and so lots of posters, lots of good press. Here's another promo single for, I believe, to Take Hold of the Flame from Spain. Japanese warning single, and it's a promo.
They're very small in the book too. You can't probably make it out. In the color one, it's definitely a lot easier to read these, but they're faxes from Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, who actually wanted to manage Queensryche when they were first getting signed or just got signed, right, somewhere around that time. So that's kind of. And
I've got those original telexes in my collection. Cool. They, before the warning, before they recorded the warning, the two main dudes from Kiss wanted to produce them, and they thought better of it and wanted to go. They really wanted to go with the Pink Floyd producer, so because they all loved Pink Floyd and they all loved the guitar sounds that James Guthrie was getting, especially on The Wall and for the next album after that, which escapes me at the moment.
Rage for Order.
No, for the Pink Floyd record.
Oh, for Pink Floyd, the final cut.
The final cut, yeah. So they went on to then touring. They didn't have as much control on the warning, and they went way over budget. But it was a great record. A lot of people still cite as one of their favorites. Yeah. And Kim and Diana were able to make some pretty good deals as far as having a little more control on the next record, which was Rage for Order. Very high-tech sounding record. Lyrically, it got way out there, kind of 1984 Orwellian kind of machines taking over the world and the strife, of civilization and martial law, and a lot of these really heady things that people our age grew up with, the whole Cold War, and we're just a button push away from the bomb coming over, and so a lot of that kind of thing is reflected in their art and their lyrical, and even in the sound on this record, because it's there's so many sort of mechanical machine sounds, and it's pretty startling, but it's really I know for most people like myself, it's probably my favorite Queensryche record.
That's mine as well.
Yeah.
A while back, it probably would have been Operation Mindcrime, and maybe they're interchangeable for me at some points, but Rage for Order has really grown on me, and I didn't like it as much when it came out. I just didn't understand it as young as I was, a teenager. I didn't. It's like, oh, this is kind of weird. It's different. I liked it, but it was like, this is kind of experimental. That now, and it sold pretty well at the time. It continued to grow their sales. When we talked to Kim, he was pretty positive. It was very close to hitting gold at that time, and did, even though it wasn't certified till much later on. There's always some interesting stuff with the RIAA and when the labels actually choose to certify it, or if they do. Um, so, but yeah, the album continued to be a little more successful, really poised them for their next album, Operation Mindcrime. But Rage for Order now is considered not only to be a major pioneering record in progressive metal, that was one of those foundational ones that people still look back and say, wow, those guys really, took the metal genre, fusing the progressive rock stuff in there even more, and took it to another level. Along with Fate's Warning and other bands that were, sort of pioneering at that time. Queensryche really was the one that, probably got the most attention, being on the bigger label, that influenced a lot of bands. I don't think you would have a number of bands that have cited those guys as an influence. You wouldn't have that development of progressive, metal music as time has gone on. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting record, and still a lot of things where you can discover new stuff when you listen to it every time. I still do, kind of like, wow, that's interesting. I don't, so yeah.
Yeah, and like you were saying, James, Operation Mindcrime, I think that's where they really broke out. A conceptual piece with three main characters that takes you through this really harrowing story of the human condition, and it struck a chord with, obviously, with many more people, because I think Queensryche found a lot of their fan base at that point. I mean, and interestingly enough, the album was a little flat when it came out, and they chose to do a video for, I believe it was Eyes of a Stranger, or I Don't Believe in Love. I think that was the first one.
Eyes of a Stranger was the first one.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah,
and they started playing that on TV, and all of a sudden the phones were ringing at the station, and the band quickly jumped on that, and they presented a conceptual piece with 6 or 7 videos from the songs from the album, which then gave a visual representation of the music, and just it's this little mini movie, and of course it blew the band up, and even to this day there's people going, when are they going to make the movie of this thing?
Well, then, it, as Brian said, it was sort of a slow burner, and that people liked it, but it was more the core fan base when it initially came out, and the video really broke them to, both that video, and then a few months later they did I Don't Believe in Love. That was a huge video too. They went from being on opening tours for Def Leppard and Metallica to jumping off and doing their own headlining tour. And this was for arenas. Now, they'd done club shows where they headlined in the past over the years, but the arena, the big theaters and the arena stuff were always as support act.
Yeah.
And then they finally were able to jump off and headline their own tours, never looking back.
Right. And then it really wasn't until the next album where they were really just headliners for life after that.
Yeah.
It took them a number of years, but they springboard from Operation Mindcrime, and most of us know what all that stuff looks like from a memorabilia standpoint. And they had some really great graphics, so I love from graphically. I think a lot of that Operation Mindcrime stuff is really stunning. One of the really cool rarities that came out when you were part of the fan club was this Message from X. It was this red cassette tape, this mysterious tape. It came in an envelope with a set of rosary beads. And until you listened to the tape, you didn't know what it was about, but it was a message from Dr. X, some subversive stuff that I can't even really talk about now. It'll have to come out eventually, when we're all dead and gone, and then that information comes out. But pretty cool little gimmick that they had going on.
And that's, they still play songs a set. Jeff Tate and his solo tours have done, complete playing the whole album. Of course, a few years later on in the 2000s, they did, jumping forward just a bit to kind of still on the Mindcrime things. They did finally do a sequel. It did very well at the time. Here's a flyer from the show with a ticket that Brian went to up here at the Moore Theater in Seattle. They performed both. So the really cool thing about it is, even though Mindcrime 2 was, of course, a bit disappointing to people just because you didn't have all the original members anymore. There was outside songwriting and playing on it. Something which was a bit hidden at the time, but came out later on, that, producer Jason Slater played and co-wrote a lot of the stuff on there, and other members did too, and or non-members did too. So it was a little bit of a kind of putting it together to, to try to make, a good record. But it sold very well. They did very well for the label. They sold enough copies to make the money back and really do well for everybody. So even though it was on a much smaller scale than the original release for EMI, it did very well for them. And I think it really kind of restarted them. As we know, jumping back to the album after Mindcrime, Empire was huge. They had a number 2 was Silent City was a number 2 on the Billboard charts as far as a single, I think, wasn't it? Just
it was,
or 2 or 3. Yeah, it was pretty
must
high
have been there.
the
I mean, they won an American Music Award for the song.
Yeah.
They were nominated with the Grammy for it.
They had a diamond
Just one more thing about Operation Mindcrime. It is now in the lexicon of famous concept albums. You've got the Who with Pinball Wizard. You've got Pink Floyd's The Wall, and you've got Operation Mindcrime, and they usually go in about that order as important records in that style of album making. So pretty cool company for a band from Bellevue. But Empire, they looked at Empire saying, we're gonna kind of simplify things in the sense that we're not going to do these big thematic pieces anymore. We're going to write these really strong songs, but individual songs, and probably commercially, Queensryche had their most success. They certainly had more people, fan base wise, latch on to the band with Empire. There was I don't know if they were consciously writing singles, but the songs were so strong and so melodic that those, and the videos all went with them, and they had these little mini stories within the songs, and so that's why it's triple platinum, quadruple.
It went triple platinum. Was probably more than that now.
Yeah.
Silent City was a number 1 single, actually, as I thought of.
Yeah.
They had 3 top 10 singles. Jet City Woman, Anybody Listening were all in the top 10. They had a couple other singles in like the top 20. So 5 or 6 singles from I think 6 actually. It quickly went gold, triple platinum. Silent City was huge. I mean, the video was on MTV all the time, on the radio all the time. They still play it now. Very Pink Floydian, so they kind of kept drawing back from their elements and influences of Rush and Pink Floyd and some of the more progressive bands. Jeff was a very big prog rock guy we didn't mention earlier. I think that was a lot of the fusion that really worked. It was heavy metal, but they brought in these progressive elements from Yes and Rush and these type of bands and Floyd.
And the last couple of records, they'd used a lot of orchestration, working with Michael Kamen.
Yeah, it was with Pink Floyd.
So that was a kind of a long 3 or 4 year period of time coming in their future where they were doing a lot of that type of work with him. Queensryche, good looking guys, always seem to have a lot of gals coming to the shows buying the records. But I'm going to tell you, by Empire and Silent Lucidity, the off the charts. The ladies,
The pop charts.
the ladies found Queensryche, and that was one of their, you know, from a fandom standpoint, they had a lot of people jumping on board. And even now, the gals, you go to shows and gals are there. You know,
It's a
really
diverse of a
really
crowd,
diverse
yes,
crowd. Yeah.
Well, and the pop, as they, a lot of people said it's more commercial album for them. There's actually still quite a lot of progressive elements.
Sure.
There's longer songs, certain structures. There's different, chord sequences and stuff are a little bit more complex, and so there's still that elements. Of course, but it's in a more commercial way, sort of like
Right.
Pink Floyd had a lot of that.
Well, and they had opportunities. They had opportunities at that point. So during this time, they were doing a lot of soundtrack songs, using Michael Kamen and orchestration, and so they were bringing their progressive nature, their background to the masses with these soundtracks, and so it was a really good time for Queensryche between '89 and 92, 93. There was just a lot of awareness of the band, and they got to, again, that was their prime time for doing headlining tours all over the world. They were filling big arenas, and some of the bands that they were opening for were now opening for them. And they were affording newer bands the same opportunities they got. And so never will you hear another band complain about how Queensryche took care of them, because they remembered their past as well.
And they still, just recently seeing them for seventh time or whatever, I've seen them now with Todd LaTorre fronting them. Brian saw him up in Seattle at Neptune, where I went up before and saw him pre-COVID, but I saw him down in Portland at Crystal Ballroom. But on this tour, they brought Marty Friedman with his solo band from Japan as support, and Trauma, which features now Brian Allen. And of course, that was Cliff Burton's band pre-Metallica, San Francisco band, had a record out a little bit later on Shrapnel. In recent times, Brian Allen, they've done a new album. Brian Allen's a Portland singer that goes back to a British Steel, Judas Priest cover band, and Father Mary and Bloodstone and some other bands at the time. And more recent years of sang for Malice and Vicious Rumors in reunion periods for them. So they were just happened to be friends, and to bring those kind of bands out on tour with them is another showing that they just, that's not, they could have easily had, I'm sure, some other touring band, label band or whatever, and they picked some interesting support bands. John 5 was a support for them, and a newer band as well. And of course, following Empire and that huge success, it would be a few, 3-4 years before they had another record out, and the music scene had kind of changed. So by the time Promised Land was finally done, which was a process of building a studio on an island in the San Juans and going through the whole thing, which of course there is a video of that. There's a CD-ROM that's kind of cool. And I'm going to show those because those are fairly common to find. But yeah, there's an interesting change in the scene, because we had grunge come out that was huge, with Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Nirvana, and a lot of those bands. And then of course, just the alternative stuff kind of changing the scene in general. A lot of people were kind of moved away in the industry from the heavy metal, especially kind of the LA sort of hair glam metal that was huge in the late 80s. The music scene shifted. So there's more interest in punk and alternative and kind of fusions of that stuff. And we had the funk metal stuff had been happening with Faith No More and Red Hot Chili Peppers. You had Jane's Addiction and and then Seattle had its own sort of thing, where it kind of, a lot of these bands came out of the punk scenes, and alternative sort of started becoming this fusion of things. And I think Queensryche, they never really seemed to follow trends. They kind of just had made their own path. They were trying to create this unique music. Every album was different, and Promised Land is really no exception to that. In fact, they kind of went back to Rage for Order sort of direction, is even more progressive in a lot of ways, that record, and one that it did okay. It did pretty well at the time. You can't, a million selling copy, a platinum record, you can't really say as a failure, but I don't think it quite had the legs that the previous two did. Um, but they sort of survive that,
Well,
you know, and
And Promised Land was really a result of surviving the popularity
yeah,
that they had achieved. Um, they're, each individual band member, you know, not only, they've got personal lives and other interests and businesses, and it took a toll. And Promised Land was almost a record that kind of saved the band in a sense, because if you read the lyrics, you hear the sounds, you feel kind of how heavy and almost schizophrenic some of the sounds are with IMI and Disconnected. I think the band was feeling like that, and so this was a pressure valve record, I'll call it, where they got a lot of that
yeah,
stuff out of their system and created again something completely
great,
different.
interesting record. Yeah.
Really, really haunting, inspirational records too. Um, Bridge was a single from that, and as you might know, it was a song that Chris DeGarmo wrote about um, the relationship or the lack of relationship he had with his father. Um, and that was the lead single from that record. And certainly I have a jukebox single for that song. Interesting note there, Jeff sang that song really passionately. And when the song came out, it dawned on him really quickly that he had to call his father and say, "Hey, Dad, this was Chris's song. It wasn't a song I wrote," because uh, he had gotten word that his dad was like, "Wow, that's pretty heavy." And it's like he had a really good relationship with his dad. Jeff did, and so he just wanted to make sure his dad was okay, because this is a really heavy song. It's and for those who know the story, you don't know the story. So basically, Chris's dad and separated from the family when he was quite young, and a single mom raised three kids, and he worked hard like all of his siblings, and of course he gained some success in the band, and kind of out of the woodwork, Dad shows back up and says, "Hey, well, let's start again. Let's build a bridge." And the famous line is there is, "Dad, you never built one.
Yeah.
We never had one." So pretty heavy,
And
and
unfortunately, kind of a similar story to other people that have become famous, either musicians or actors or whatever, when the estranged parent pops back out of the woodwork, maybe not so coincidentally that all of a sudden the person is famous and has made a lot of money, or so.
yeah. But
But
again, another cool album. I thought
yeah,
one of the more curious and interesting, fun things was a mouse pad with the logo uh, from the album art, totem pole. So
that's interesting.
kind of a fun little
Don't see
collectible
that.
there. No.
One cool thing too, just to mention, Chris declined to do an interview with us for the book very nicely, but we did connect. Mark, his brother Mark, did a really great interview. Brian and I were fortunate, and he's that. Sometimes that stuff's more interesting because you don't get a lot of the people outside of bands talking about, either a family member or somebody that was a peer. So to be able to have lengthy interviews with Kim Harris and Mark DeGarmo were really great for the book. Mark had a lot of great insight. He also had a lot of involvement with the band, as he was there pretty early on in development of his brother as a musician. He helped with them when they were first having the 206 record was coming out, and he had a cool story where he's talking about getting them. He worked for the TV station as an intern, and they had a contest, and he was able to get Queensryche in there, who actually won it, and that is how the one of the prizes of the two was, well, one was to be able to open for Zebra on those couple shows in the Northwest, which were their first two concerts in Seattle and Portland. And the Seattle one, of course, is where the EMI reps came and then consequently signed them. They also did a video for, was it Blinded? Night Rider. And that one was shown on local video stations. I'm not sure if it was ever shown on MTV or not. I do remember seeing the Queen of the Reich video at the time then they did that later on. But I do know I saw that maybe Night Flight or somebody showed it. People have talked about Much Music in Canada showing it. or some
Yeah.
similar
And it
show.
ended
So
up
it
on
got a
the
little bit
it
of,
ended up on their DVD,
and it's
Building
on the,
Empires.
yeah, they do
Mhm.
show. And
And
so he kind of had an interesting connection and impact with them. And of course, later on, he's the one who directed the Promised Land stuff for the CD-ROM and the video stuff and
mhm.
all that. He worked on the documentary and did and directed that.
Yeah,
And so yeah, so he had some pretty interesting stuff to talk
yeah,
about for this Queensryche bio we did, which was
yeah.
pretty cool.
And
So
and he reached out to Chris and said, "Hey, I really want to do this." And Chris was like, "This makes me nervous. I'm a little." And he just said, "Hey, after talking to these guys, they seem like their heads in the right place. I think they're going to do a fine job." And he says, "If I have any concerns, I'll let you know, and we'll just cut it off." Well, he came through, did the interview, really enjoyed it, gave us a lot of great information we wouldn't have ever had, and reported back to his brother that these guys are safe. It was all going to work out. And as it turned out, after after Chris got his own copy of the book, which I'd given to his daughter, and she gave it to him. He did reach out to our other co-writer, uh, Brian Heaton, sent him a quick email saying, "I liked the book. I think you did um, a fair story of the band," and he was happy. And quite frankly, that's all the thanks we needed. And so while it was an independently written book, unauthorized, we did get feedback from really the one member of the band we really wanted to hear from.
well, just not to go too much into it, we did reach out to the other band members, and um, so for whatever reason it didn't happen with getting new interviews with some of the guys. It's just the way it goes. They were aware of it.
Yep.
We've gotten copies to everybody. We met with everybody. Everybody was cool. We did it like Brian said, as fans that wanted to just tell the history because there wasn't a book of the band out. We felt, hey, they're coming up on their 40th anniversary. It seems like they should have one.
Yeah.
So yeah, like we said, so we did as an unauthorized. We weren't expecting that it needed to be an authorized thing. We figured they could certainly do their own books or whatever.
Hmm.
Since then, it's kind of cool to see that first is Ross Halfron's doing a book
Yep.
because he
Alfred.
toured with him quite a bit during the mine crime, and he's a Q Prime. I think he worked for directly or something at the time.
Yeah.
He's doing a book that's kind of more photography based. It sounds like on the Empire mine
Yeah,
crimes.
Empire. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
kind of time period. So that's really cool. Looking forward to seeing that. Jeff Tate's also announced he's been working on a bio, so that's great. I'm interested to read his
Yeah.
as well. I mean, this is what we really hoped was that other people might also do these kind of books. And of course, we had done Rusted Metal, as this has been an ongoing thing where I talked about bands from that book, and of course we had Queensryche in there as well. We've also announced that right now we're in the editing stages, getting a lot of images together for the Metal Church bio. Still plan to have a pre-order for that drop, hopefully late summer for a fall release. We're looking really good on that. Got a couple other books in the work. We're not quite. One will be announcing very soon, and then another one just pretty early in the stages, so we probably won't tell next year. But we're going to continue to do books. We like doing that, working together on that. It's always really fun to work as a team, so we really like. So Brian and Brian are actually working on a book that's pretty cool. We're going to announce that pretty soon. And then now I'm working with Brian Heaton on another book as well. So Brian's
Yeah.
definitely come on the team as Brian Heaton has definitely come on as a partner in this sort of journey as well. It's pretty great. As I said, he's friends with the band guys. Important thing to mention too is with the interviews, we're definitely sourced from original ones we do as that are newer ones as well as some older ones we've had. Um, Interviews other people have done that would let us use, have permission to be able to use material. So we try to source enough different interesting quotes from interviews to help shape the bios as kind of typical. So we've been really fortunate for a lot of support from other people. So we're really grateful
Yeah.
of all the other journalists that have done great interviews that have let us. So it's really been kind of a fun process to kind of get everybody involved to some degree. It's just, I mean, I've worked on various book projects over the years, and we've worked on record projects, and this is much more fun doing these ones where we work together on stuff. I have a much better time than just
Yeah.
kind of sitting at home doing it all myself. So that's fun. So we'll definitely look for more from that for us in the
Right.
future. So
And then with Northwest Metalworks and the music that we're uncovering, there's new stuff coming, some surprises coming. We'll let you know in due time, but keep paying attention because we've got some good stuff coming.
yep. And as we said, about Queensryche, the band itself, of course, if you by chance have never listened to their music or heard, there's a lot to deep dive in. Of course, they continued on even after Chris left with different guitarists, kind of up and down, for a bit. There's some releases people liked than others throughout the late 90s and 2000s. And then, personally, we're big fans of the Todd Latore era now. They've gone back to a lot of the more heavy metal as they kind of, sort of drifted away to kind of different, more modern, sort of new metal or whatever kind of elements working into some of the 2000 stuff. A bit up and down with the releases, but the the last four records, in my opinion, have been really, really good and progressively gotten better.
Yep.
A lot of progressive elements coming back, a lot of the more 80s kind of traditional metal coming back in there. Todd was a fan growing up of that stuff. His favorite record is Warning. He's gone on record talking about, so he's definitely they pulled some cool stuff with Throwing Before the Storm and NM156 and some deeper cuts like that. Screaming in Digital, him doing that was pretty phenomenal. Yeah. But yeah, so we continue to kind of go see him too and to be excited about the shows. And so we're still fans of the band. We've, kind of went the ups and downs of, but hey, 40 years now, that's a pretty good longevity. And obviously they're still out there playing shows and making records. Jeff's doing well with solo stuff and doing records. And, so yeah, so it don't seem like they're going to go away too soon. So definitely a cool band.
Check them out.
So check them out. So, all right. So it's Brian Nairn and James Beach for Northwest Metalworks Music and Books. Thanks for joining us. Next week, I'm going to add just a little bit of Q in with R because we just have a couple bands. Q5, of course, probably being the most notable one. And so most of the focus will be on R, and we'll kind of continue on through the alphabet. And then we'll continue to have some different interviews and things posted. I kind of put that on the back burner because I really like doing this weekly thing on the bands and kind of talking about some more obscure bands that we had in Rusted Metal and showing different releases that you can find out there and collect and look for and, all that sort of thing to kind of keep the Northwest metal and hard rock going. So, all right. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.